not every position in an organization needs to be a full-time employee. And so part of that is thinking outside the box of, well, how do you get the best talent for the cash flow that can actually be budgeted?
Welcome to Wholly Fractional, the podcast dedicated to elevating the role and success of fractional workers everywhere. I am your host, Andrew Graft. Wholly Fractional, the future of work starts here, and it starts now. Welcome to the Wholly Fractional podcast, everyone. I'm Andrew Graft here. Today on Wholly Fractional, we will be meeting with someone I'm particularly fond of. He has a postgraduate degree from the College of Corporate America. He is a solopreneur. He's a business coach. He's a good friend. And as far as I'm concerned, he is the real deal. So I am, of course, talking about Kurt Rudsinski. Welcome to the show, Kurt.
I appreciate that. We've always had a great time when we get together and just talk about how we can help each other. So I'm looking forward to it.
So before we dive into your past career experience, which has been extensive, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing right now.
Born and raised in the Midwest. I look at my past from a blessing perspective of being able to be in a lot of different situations with a lot of different people in a lot of different community. And ultimately, what transpired for me is part of my own spiritual journey and professional journey really came to the conclusion of how can I take 30 years of my knowledge and impart that across a wider base to create a bigger, wider, deeper impact and ultimately a legacy of leaving something better than I found it.
Let's talk about that diverse career for a moment, because one of the things that really struck me early on was this wide-ranging professional career that starts in finance and goes to sales and to marketing and manufacturing, and then it goes back to banking. And finally, you go out on your own, you dip your toe in as a fractional, and it leads you eventually to really more formal business coaching. To start with, just for whom their minds are a little blown by that, how does that happen?
When you were articulating that, I always look back at, wow, that resume probably doesn't read great. And yet every step along the way, I was always trying to manage that corporate ladder with what is that next right step and how do I position myself for it? Probably discounting considerably, the value proposition for myself and my own purpose of what am I doing at that time and the why. And so as I became more exposed to corporate life and how other entities were running, public entities, private entities, and then going out and helping nonprofits and then getting into an executive position with a manufacturing company, I started to see how within that private sector, the business operations themselves changed considerably in the private sector versus the public sector. And for me, I started really loving the entrepreneur stories of how businesses got started, when they started growing, why they started growing, what's next for them. And at that point, it just became disconnected to the point where it's like, well, I'm just going to try to do the best that I can with the clients that I have, continue to be creative in my thought paths because I've got a diverse background. And if I can help them, great. And that's where it was going to end.
How would you describe the legacy you'd like to leave?
When you think of legacy, I always look at my three priorities are faith, family, and profession. And so I think for me, you have legacies in all three of those genres, trying to be a better Christian, better husband, better father, better friend professionally. One of my key metrics that I'm going to measure my own success, whether or not it's in my fractional client base or whether or not it's in my growth coaching, is how many businesses do continue to improve as a result of me playing a small part in it, that if they are doing the right things and investing in their people, now my head count starts to become how many families are positively impacted by having a better run business.
Do you feel like you're living more your authentic self at this point?
I think authenticity and genuineness as I've gone through self-awareness, I've always had that. I think what was lacking was the purpose, the higher purpose of, okay, is everything that I'm doing ultimately, yes, I'm helping said client, but at the end of the day, in a corporate environment, you're also being managed by corporate earnings, and then the corporate earnings either hit or miss. And as a result, incentive pay is changed accordingly, and either you have some or you don't. And yet the executives, I found myself a lot of times in the corporate environment helping make a lot of money for an organization that helped the executives, but I started becoming disconnected, maybe disenchanted might be the right word, with the purpose. So it was probably more me growing up. Well, I can still help clients. Maybe this is just not the right vehicle to be doing it, and trying to get more out of transactional space and more into relational space for me is very much, right now I feel pretty authentic, pretty genuine, pretty joy filled when I'm having conversations, that I have that freedom and flexibility now just to say, hey, how's life? How's business? What's working? What's not working? Oh, well, I might be able to help you with that. Or seems lately, I'm just doing a good job of connecting. Well, I know someone that can do that a lot better than me. Let me put the two of you together and see how that works for you.
From the very first time we met, you've been a very loud and vocal proponent of the fractional model. For our audience listening, were you ever in a fractional role yourself, or has your main focus been on hiring other fractionals?
By definition, I'm sure if you look up fractional in Webster's, I didn't meet it very well. When I left corporate America, I had a contract in place to fall into CFO, finance executive role with a nonprofit that helps developmentally disabled individuals from early stages of life through the end of life. I'd been involved with the agency from a board level. And so the contract in and of itself started my solopreneurship of what I thought was going to be fractional, from the standpoint of, I come in and do a couple things departmentally because multiple departments reported to me, to clean them up a little bit, both in terms of systems, processes, and people. From that vantage point, I thought maybe this is a few days a week. Maybe it's a few months. So I thought that was my first step into fractionalism.
What happened instead?
Well, as it would turn out, yes, I was self-employed, but it became a full-time fractional. So I don't know if that meets fractional definition or not, but it did take a while to find the right people. From there, though, I have picked up a couple fractional contracts, came across my business coaching tools, and that just made all the sense in the world to go out and become certified to do that as well, to have that as an offering. I still have one foot in the fractional space right now, and then I've got my growth coaching practice that is probably, I would say, launched officially the last 6 to 9 months. And so that's where all of our conversations that we've had and that I've been connected through LinkedIn with other fractionals, that's the value that I'm now seeing, is as I'm helping smaller organizations identify what their leadership team needs to look like in order for them to grow, they're lacking in various skill sets to get all the roles and responsibilities done that the organization will need to be in. When you start having those conversations, it's a little scary but exciting with entrepreneurs that, well, if I'm $2.5 million now and you're telling me in 2 to 3 years I'm going to be a $5 million company, what does that look like? What don't I have? And so for me, as I've started developing relationships through discovery calls on LinkedIn with other fractionals, it's been eye-opening, from people that have branding specialties to marketing experts to human resource experts to procurement. I'm developing those relationships that then become part of my tool belt, that as I continue to bring value to an organization to help them, you know what? They have this specific need. I'm starting to develop within the fractional space the people that have the talent that we all know that costs keep going up and it's hard to pass along those. So it's a delicate balancing act when it's like, not every position in an organization needs to be a full-time employee. And so part of that is thinking outside the box of, well, how do you get the best talent for the cash flow that can actually be budgeted that will help move the organization. So that's been a huge benefit for me, developing those relationships within the network.
This is a harbinger of something that I feel like is coming down the pike, which is as corporate America gets increasingly allergic to the idea of hiring full-time people because they don't want to pay benefit, any and all reasons you want to say. But Kurt has identified an ethos that I just believe is going to become more and more common. I know we as fractionals think about it going out and saying, I got to go beat the bushes for myself. And we'll continue to do that. I'll contact this company. I'll do whatever. But someone like Kurt is natural connector, not just in terms of, hey, I know this dude, maybe you could go hit him up for some work. He's literally building teams of fractionals who can go and help businesses at that fractional level.
As I've played in both universes, there is a significant difference between consulting and coaching. And I look at the fractional space being the consultants because they are involved in the day-to-day operations of moving a business forward, growing a business. Being a consultant is a little bit more tactical. As a coach, I'm really the one challenging status quo, maybe getting a leadership team of 3 to 5 out of groupthink to say, hey, have you thought of this? i.e., when looking at if you have a void in, and I'll use an example, marketing. Well, okay, you can't afford a CMO. You're not big enough. You don't need it. It's not full-time hours anyway. What does a project look like? How do you define a project? And go find the 8 hours of the best talent that you can to get it done. So it's truly about accomplishing those tasks. And so as a coach, that's probably the biggest difference is I don't necessarily do the solution. I just help a team come to consensus in terms of an alignment of where they're going, that once they have that, it makes making decisions a little bit quicker and easier.
I know you've basically described coaching as less about merely going in and telling people what to do, and instead about helping people find their own path. What does that look like? What's your process by which you help companies do that?
Most of my coaching platforms are strategic session days. And what I love about them is it creates an opportunity where a leadership team can be removed from the day-to-day business to focus on the business. And we go through everything from helping them with business plans to learning new disciplines about, well, how do you make a decision? Well, it should be the most important thing to your business, not necessarily what's interesting or urgent. So what actually drives your business? So part of it is adult learning, getting to learn new skills about how to approach issues that an organization might be facing and how to make better decisions. By doing that, the team is communicating better. The organization is hearing more transparency is coming down. As a result, you start making better decisions. You start executing better. And it's really a simplification and prioritization of their objectives that all come together. But what I love about my platform is 25 to 33% of the time, we're spending it on the people.
One of the first things you said to me, and I knew we saw eye to eye, is you said you can't grow a business without growing the people.
As you start to grow your business, build a business, as a solopreneur, I'm thinking in the future of my network of fractionals. They all become technically quasi-employees anyway. And so I'm doing that assessment when we're getting to know each other. I think our first call together, was very much, well, our culture and core values without ever articulating it and being in 2 different states, never having met each other, we're pretty good in alignment. And I think that goes back to that adage of people don't leave companies, they leave their managers. So the better that relationship, the better that you're running a business based on its culture and core values. A really successful organization should be willing to hire and fire people that aren't living up to their core values.
I'm curious, in your coaching experience, or for that matter, your professional career, have you ever experienced situations where culture was, let's just say, problematic?
There's that other adage that you always learn best by what not to do. I definitely enjoyed my time with an employer. It might have been one of the better seasons for what I was doing. But yes, the culture was less than ideal. And so when you started looking at it, and this stems all the way from, when you look at a benefit package of an employer says a lot about their culture. How much do they care about their employees? And if you can't afford a nice benefit package, but if you're articulating that, hey, you know what, we're going to grow the business so that we can do that better, and it's being transparent, that it shows that level of caring, connecting those dots of the people from a cultural perspective of this is what we do, how we do it, why we do it. Does that align with you? And oh, by the way, we've got a set of core values that this is the team that we want to bring together. And should you not meet that, then we both know the future conversation that's going to happen.
You shared with me before what you've called this 4 non-negotiable traits of successful business. Talks about making decisive people moves and investing. Instead of me telling that story, why don't you just briefly tell the audience what your approach is?
Historically speaking, over my career, the vast majority of successful businesses make decisive people moves. Depending on the mindset, that can come off with very negative connotations. For me, decisive people moves just means that it's timely in terms of you're not allowing a staff to maybe wane 2 months, 3 months longer than they should when you know that a change is inevitable. I think for me, having been in situations, having those discussions with staff that will eventually turn over, it's a planned turnover. As a leader of people, there's an element of you're also helping that employee. If the entity itself is not getting their desired result, and if the employee realizes that and might not be happy in that, maybe they don't have the skills necessary to do it. You create, and you're very intentional about, well, how can I coach you up to see if we can get you there? If not, why are we both less than happy? I mean, at the end of the day, that means that you're probably very disappointed or displeased coming to work 8 hours a day if you're doing something that you're not good at or you don't like. So how do we work together? And so from that decisive people move, then you bring the human element of, no, I'm not firing you tomorrow. But I think you've kind of agreed on you might be better served somewhere else. We might agree that way. How do we create that plan to do that together so that we help you in your next step? So that's what decisive people moves mean to me, is that willingness to objectively say, do I have the right person in the right seat? Then the other facets are organizations that invest and obsessed with culture. They invest and obsess with training. Turnover is a really hard cost to quantify, but the disruption that turnover has within organization, you're always better off, and it's more affordable if you can start developing that bench and let the low tide rise so that as the low tide's rising, everyone's rising. And then the last one is celebrating success, sales, wins. You have to have that ability to give the attaboys where needed. And it may not always be in that sales and marketing function. It could be you've had this open position and the head of HR, finally found the right candidate that got through the interviews that then said yes. I mean, celebrate the successes within an organization. But as you can see, all 4 of those in my mind are all tied to the people side of the business. And if you're doing the right thing by the people, that could be in-house as well as external, you're more likely than not going to have the end result show up on your P&L statement.
Absolutely. From your perspective as a coach, what advice would you offer to the fractionals in our audience today?
To me, what helped the most, and I also help coach organizations, is the more a fractional can understand the why they are doing it. So a fractional, as I've met, like I said, several with great discipline. So you have a certain skill set. That's wonderful. What has been lacking at some point in your journey to create the why for why you're in the fractional space? And I think the more that you can articulate a why, which really ties into purpose and vision, if you are solid in terms of this is why I'm doing what I'm doing in the fractional space, then the what and the how you're doing it and the value proposition becomes a lot easier when you're having conversations either with your own prospects or with other fractionals in the network to say, this is me, 10 seconds of the skills that I have, but this is why I'm now doing what I'm doing. I saw this gap in my prior life and I saw a better way of helping.
Lastly, what advice would you have given yourself at the beginning of your career, knowing what you know now?
I think I'm starting to actually live it out in a roundabout way. As I mentioned, I was a loosely termed athlete with dreams of being the Major League Baseball player. But even at that point in time, I had my why. And this is not meant to sound cliche. It was meant to be having that pedestal, that platform to then go in and brighten up children's hospitals. And that was, yeah, you get paid to play a sport. That would be fun and all the niceties of being a professional athlete. But I wanted at that time to use it as a platform to help children. And lo and behold, I go back to 2014 when I said yes to getting involved with a nonprofit board that I know it was helping kids. For me, I've always looked at there are a lot of people that we're all dealt different hands. And to have that ability to take whatever skill set has been accumulated for me and help those that have been dealt a hand that at the end of the day, they're short on some things. And so for me, I wanted to be a baseball player. I wanted to help children. I find myself now 20, 30, 40 years later, starting to be able to do that through my own nonprofit volunteering. The best advice that I got in my previous life was how to actually use questions to complain. And I'll never forget that manager. And I think it helped start me down the path of I'm just really good at asking good questions. And I think that's where it all started from. You can't walk in and complain to a manager. How do you get them to see your side of it? And the best way of doing that's through questioning.
Fantastic. So for anyone who hasn't heard this before, this is our lightning round of questionably fractional questions. And every guest we have answers these questions. And Kurt, you are on the hot seat.
All right, let's go.
All right. First of all, what is your one favorite piece of software, app, or technology, something you use all the time and you can't live without it?
Are you going to make me say this? It's my iPhone, but I have to label that as it's my iPhone 8. I'm still using my iPhone 8. So I know that I think we're on 16 or 17, and I just don't even want to go sit in a store and have everything transition. So my iPhone is definitely, I'd be lost without it.
Okay. Question number 2. Kurt, what is your favorite or what do you consider your most influential business book?
2010, I read Jim Collins' Good to Great. And from that moment, the principle of talent acquisition, get the right people, one of the on the bus. So when I think about getting the right people on the bus, that's talent, but it's also, do they fit culturally and do they meet my core values? So now I'm sitting there going, I love that whole concept of right people on the bus. Once you have the right people in the organization, then as leaders, it's your job to find the right seat for them. And if they're in a wrong seat, too many times we've seen salespeople get promoted out of the sales and they're terrible managers of people. It's like, go back and just sell. You're great at it.
The other thing I learned about that very principle you talked about, if you're a new manager or you're any manager for that matter, the key about devoting so much time and effort getting the right person on the bus and in the right seat, management is so easy when you have the right people. Management sounds like it can be a slog, and it's really hard if you've got the wrong person. That's when it's hardest. Do yourself the favor. Invest in finding the right person for that seat. Take the time. That was probably my biggest giveaway.
Absolutely.
What was your all-time favorite vacation or place to visit?
I have 3 kids, all in their 20s now. And for us, our family vacation was always spending time at a lake up in Door County, Wisconsin. And principally for me, it was the quality time of being together as a family and spending a whole week in the same cabin. It was preparing your own meals. It was going to bed when the sun went down, getting up when the sun rose. And so being part of nature, but it was really the quality family time that I look back and I reflect at the pictures of my kids playing in Lake Michigan or the lake that we were on, just recalling those memories of that quality time together.
That is so cool. You may have answered this one previously, but if you could go back in time, what profession would you have loved to attempt, whether you were successful at it or not?
Well, like I said, I wasn't successful. So the baseball path would have been my choice, my dream. When I got into the professional world, I started seeing the importance. If I were to change my banking career, I might have looked at going into wealth management a little bit more from the standpoint of really helping an individual maximize and I guess maybe help them answer the question, what is the more for? I love having those conversations. Even as a growth coach, when you help an organization, that's great. Why are we doing this? And once you reach there, what's that more for? Having those conversations about seeing the entrepreneur that started in his garage, that then he, is successful selling it at whatever 10x. It's like, well, that's great. How do you monetize all of that work, all of those sleepless nights? I always enjoyed those conversations with owners. And so I probably would have gone into more of a wealth management advisory role at that time.
I love that. Okay. But you may have answered this one too, you punk. What is the single best piece of advice you've ever received or lesson you've learned in life? Hint, it has to do with asking questions.
I can still remember it. It might have been 2000. And being in a corporate setting and a corporate policy was the new edict. Needless to say, I sternly disagreed with it. Luckily, I had a relationship with my direct manager. I think one of those pieces of advice was have an open door. And if I have that relationship, and I always tried to cultivate that with anyone that reported to me, was I will allow you the space to vent and I will give you that openness without judgment. To then he turned that to say, how well do you think that's going to be received now that you've complained versus how could you formulate and rearrange those words to share what is the spur or the thorn in your side that you don't like, but do it in a less confrontational way. And so that was really the start of the whole line of just start asking better questions, start listening more, and be willing to let some of your peers or your direct reports. It's a fine balance of keeping it respectful, but letting them know that you have their back. You can come in here and use it as a training opportunity too.
Yeah, questions for knowledge and questions for diplomacy purposes. I love that.
I like how you worded it much better than me.
Well, people who know me know I'm nothing if not obsessed with my words. So lastly, where can people learn more about you, Kurt, and your work?
The easiest place to learn about me is through LinkedIn. I have all of my contact information there. They can learn a little bit more about my Bloom Growth coaching practice, as well as some of the skills that I've acquired. I have a website that I can share with anyone that's interested. And so I try to use LinkedIn, my website, and obviously all my information's on my email. So those are the three easiest spots to get me.
Fantastic. We come to the end of another edition of Wholly Fractional. I want to thank our guest, Kurt Rudsinski, for appearing on the show today. And of course, thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. Until next time, as always, stay healthy, stay safe, and stay fractional.